Wind cut like razors. Snow erased every footprint on the ridge. She lay pressed against ice, white shoulder patches dusted with frost.
Cover right!
Mission parameters simple,
Pushing left.
support only. Below, the entire
Target,
squad was
200
trapped in the
meters.
valley,
Taking the
radio
shot now.
crackling with cold interference. Orders from above remained unchanged. The plan stayed fixed, but the silence was different, too clean, too perfect. Through her scope, she caught it. A dark point that didn't belong to Snow. If she waited for orders, they would die. If she pulled the trigger, she would break everything. She exhaled. Winter spared no one. Neither did bullets. Private First Class Natalie Cord checked her position for the fourth time in 20 minutes. Same coordinates, same frozen rock, same assignment that put her 800 meters from anything that mattered. Support overwatch, rear security, eyes on the approach. Not exactly what they sold her during recruitment. The ridge stretched northeast, a spine of granite and ice that overlooked the valley floor where the real mission would happen. Wind screamed across the exposed rock, carrying snow in horizontal sheets. Temperature sat at -12°C, and that was before wind chill factor. Her Barrett M82 lay beside her, wrapped in white fabric, barrel pointed downrange toward nothing in particular. 300 meters to her right, Corporal James Vickers occupied another hide site. Radio discipline meant no chatter, but she knew he was there. Same support assignment, same irrelevance. Below, the main element 8 operators led by Staff Sergeant Marcus Kane would advance through the valley, clear the abandoned listening post, extract whatever intelligence remained, and withdraw before dark. Simple operation, low complexity rating, the kind of mission where support assets existed to check a box on the operational checklist, not to contribute. Natalie shifted her weight, felt ice crack beneath her elbow. 2 years in the regiment, 43 missions logged, 43 times occupying high ground while others did the work. She was good at her job. Range qualifications proved that, but being good at a job nobody cared about was its own kind of punishment. Her spotter, Specialist Ryan Cole, had rotated out last month. Budget cuts meant no replacement. Now she operated alone, which was fine. Spotters asked questions, made noise, disrupted the math. Alone, she could work the numbers. Wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, temperature differentials between valley and ridge, all the variables that turned a rifle into a precision instrument instead of a loud stick. The valley spread below like a gray bowl. Patches of pine forest interrupted the snow. The listening post sat at the northern end, a cluster of concrete structures built into the hillside, abandoned 18 months ago when the previous government collapsed. Intelligence suggested the site held encrypted communications equipment, maybe records, worth checking, not worth risking much. Kane's voice broke radio silence at 0847 hours. Overwatch, ground, beginning approach. Natalie keyed her radio twice, acknowledgement without words. She scanned the valley through her scope, dividing it into sectors, checking each for movement. Nothing, just wind and white, and waiting. The squad appeared 3 minutes later, dark shapes against snow, moving in a staggered column. Kane led. Behind him, Private Lucy Grant carried the radio pack. Then Sergeant Owen Harris with the breaching kit. 5 others followed, names she knew from briefings but rarely spoke to. The operators, the ones who mattered. They reached the forest edge and disappeared into the trees. Natalie maintained her scan. Her role was simple. Watch the approaches. Report anything unusual. Provide covering fire if things went wrong. That last part was theoretical. In 43 missions, she had never fired her weapon outside of a range. Wind gusted. Snow pelted her face, found gaps in her clothing. She ignored it. Cold was information, not discomfort. Cold meant the wind came from the northwest at approximately 25 kilometers per hour. Cold meant she needed to adjust her dope by 0.7 mils to compensate for air density. Cold meant her fingers would lose dexterity in another hour, so if something happened, it needed to happen soon. She checked her watch. 0903 hours. The squad would reach the listening post in 12 minutes if they maintained pace. Her scope revealed nothing. Empty valley, silent forest, the kind of stillness that should have felt peaceful. It didn't. The briefing had happened 16 hours earlier, in a plywood structure that smelled like diesel and old coffee. Major Helen Cross stood at the front with a tablet displaying topographic maps. Primary objective: intelligence retrieval from Site Raven. Cross tapped the screen, zooming in on the listening post. Structure is abandoned but intact. We need the hard drives and any paper records. Secondary objective: confirm the site is clear for demolition next week. The operators sat in folding chairs, attentive. Kane asked about approach routes. Harris questioned entry points. Grant wanted to know about evacuation procedures if weather deteriorated. Natalie sat in the back with Vickers, their presence acknowledged by exactly no one. Cross outlined the timeline. Insert at dawn. Approach through the valley. Clear the structures by 1,000 hours. Exfiltrate before weather closed the window. Simple. Clinical. The Major moved through contingencies with practiced efficiency. Overwatch positions here and here. Cross indicated the ridge. Cord, Vickers. Standard support protocol. You'll have eyes on the valley and approaches. Report anything unusual. Maintain radio discipline unless contact is imminent. That was it. 15 seconds devoted to their part of the mission. After the briefing, Kane approached his squad, running through individual assignments, making sure everyone understood their role. Natalie packed her gear in silence, checking and rechecking her equipment. Barrett, ammunition, rangefinder, weather meter, rations. Everything she would need to spend 12 hours on frozen rock doing nothing important. Vickers appeared beside her. Another one for the highlight reel, he muttered. Could be worse. She didn't have an answer. Lieutenant Paul Grant, Lucy's older brother, stopped by their gear pile. He was the platoon leader, responsible for the whole operation, which meant he remembered support assets existed. Weather's going to be rough up there, he said. You two good with the cold? We'll manage, Natalie replied. Good. I know Overwatch isn't exactly thrilling, but it's important. Kane needs to know his flanks are secure. She nodded. The standard speech. Overwatch matters. You're part of the team. We value your contribution. Words that meant nothing because the mission would succeed or fail based on what happened in the valley, not what she saw from the ridge. Grant moved on. The briefing room emptied. Major Cross collected her tablet and left without looking at Natalie. Later, in the barracks, Lucy Grant asked about the ridge position. 800 meters up, Natalie said. Good visibility, if the weather holds. You ever actually shoot from up there? Huh. Lucy adjusted her radio pack, testing the weight. Must be frustrating. All that training and you just watch. Natalie shrugged. Frustration implied expecting something different. She had stopped expecting that months ago. At 0916 hours, Kane's squad reached the listening post perimeter. Natalie tracked their progress through her scope, watching them stack up outside the first structure. Owen Harris moved forward with the breaching kit, checking the door for traps. Radio crackled. Overwatch, ground, beginning structure clearance. 2 clicks from Natalie. 2 more from Vickers. Somewhere to her right. The squad disappeared inside. Natalie resumed her scan, dividing the valley into quadrants, checking each systematically. Northwest quadrant, empty forest, undisturbed snow. Northeast, more trees, a frozen stream barely visible through branches. Southwest, the approach they had used, tracks already filling with new snow. Southeast, open ground rising toward the far ridge. Wind picked up. Temperature was dropping. Her weather meter confirmed it, -15 now. Wind steady at 30 kilometers per hour from the northwest. She adjusted her scope settings, updated her range card with the new conditions. If she needed to shoot unlikely, she wanted the math ready. Minutes dragged. The cold worked its way through her layers, finding skin, settling into joints. She flexed her fingers inside her gloves, maintaining circulation. Her breath formed small clouds that dissipated instantly in the wind. At 0934, something changed. Not a sound, not movement, just a wrongness in the pattern of the valley. Natalie froze, trusting instinct over reason, scanning for whatever had triggered that primitive warning system. There. Southeast quadrant. A shadow that didn't match the terrain. She adjusted magnification, fighting the scope's tendency to waver in the wind. The shadow resolved into a shape, maybe a rock outcrop, maybe something else. She watched it for 30 seconds. No movement, no change. She keyed her radio. Ground. Overwatch 1. Possible contact. Southeast. You're 3 o'clock. 800 meters. Kane's response came back tense. Define possible. Shadow inconsistent with terrain. No movement. Could be natural. Keep eyes on it. She did. The shadow didn't move. Didn't reveal itself. Just sat there. A dark patch against white, refusing to be either threat or terrain. At 0947, the squad emerged from the first structure and moved to the second. Harris still on point, Grant with her radio, Kane directing traffic with hand signals. Professional, efficient, by the book. The shadow remained motionless. Natalie checked the other quadrants. Nothing. Wind continued to scream. Snow fell harder now, reducing visibility, turning the valley into a blur of white and gray. Her scope showed details, but barely. Another hour and weather would shut everything down. At 0952, Vickers broke radio silence. Overwatch 2. I've got something. Northwest tree line. Possible movement. Natalie swung her rifle toward his sector, found the trees, scanned them carefully. At first, she saw nothing. Then, between branches, a flicker of darkness that might have been wind or might have been something else. Ground Overwatch 1 confirms. Movement northwest. You're 9 o'clock, 600 meters. Kane's voice stayed calm. Natural or threat? Vickers answered. Can't confirm. Trees are too thick. Continue observation. We're almost done here. The squad entered the third structure. Only 2 buildings remained after that. Maybe 15 more minutes and they would start withdrawal, moving back through the forest toward the extraction point 2 kilometers south. Natalie returned to the shadow in the southeast. Still there. Still wrong. She checked the northwest trees. The flicker had disappeared. Her pulse accelerated slightly, a physiological response to uncertainty. She controlled her breathing, forced her heart rate down. Probably nothing. Wind playing tricks. Shadows and stress creating patterns where none existed. Probably. At 1004, the squad emerged from the third structure carrying hard drives and document cases. Mission success. Now, they just needed to leave. That was when the valley went silent. The absence of wind felt like pressure. Natalie's ears adjusted to the new quiet, searching for sounds that shouldn't exist in an empty valley. She found them. Metal clicking against metal, fabric brushing stone. Breath that wasn't hers carried on air currents that had momentarily stilled. Ground. Overwatch 1. She kept her voice flat, professional, while adrenaline dumped into her system. Multiple contacts. Northwest tree line, southeast ridge, possibly more. You're surrounded. Kane's response was immediate. All elements, defensive positions. Overwatch, I need numbers. Natalie swept her scope across the valley. The shadows were revealing themselves now, emerging from concealment with the confidence of a sprung trap. Northwest, 6 figures in white winter gear, moving through trees. Southeast, 4 more spreading across the ridge. And there northeast, previously clear 3 additional contacts flanking the approach route. Ground, I count 13 hostiles, likely more. They're cutting off your withdrawal. Overwatch 2 confirms, Vickers added. They're using the terrain. We can't see them all from our angle. Kane made the calculation instantly. Ground to command, troops in contact, requesting immediate air support. Lieutenant Grant's voice came back from base, distant and crackling. Ground, command, air assets are weathered in, negative on close air support. You need to break contact and move to alternate extraction. Command, we're boxed in. Alternate extraction is compromised. Static. Then, ground, you need to move now. Storm window is closing. But moving meant exposing themselves to established firing positions. The trap had been perfect. Wait for the squad to complete their objective. Let them load themselves with equipment, then spring the ambush at the moment when they were most vulnerable and least mobile. Natalie watched the hostile elements tighten their cordon. They moved with professional discipline, maintaining intervals, using cover, coordinating without audible communication. Not random fighters, trained soldiers with a plan. Kane tried anyway. All elements, moving to rally point beta, covering fire on my mark. The squad attempted to displace, using smoke grenades to mask their movement. It bought them 30 meters before the hostiles opened fire. Gunfire shattered the valley's silence. The distinctive crack of rifle rounds echoed off ridgelines, multiplied by terrain until it sounded like 100 weapons instead of 13. Kane's squad returned fire, but they were moving, loaded with equipment, breaking contact across open ground. The hostiles were stationary, concealed, shooting from prepared positions. Not a fair fight. Overwatch, we need suppression! Kane's voice had lost its calm, replaced by the sharp urgency of a man watching his people die. Vickers responded first, engaging northwest contacts. His rifle boomed once, twice, 3 times. One of the figures in the trees dropped. Natalie found a target in the southeast, a hostile who had exposed himself to get a better angle on the squad. She put the crosshairs on center mass, compensated for wind and distance, began her trigger press, then stopped. Her assigned sector was the approaches. The valley was Kane's problem. She was support, not assault. Taking this shot meant abandoning her position, violating her orders, acting outside her authority. The hostile fired a burst. Below, Someone in Kane's squad screamed. Natalie made her decision. Her finger rested on the trigger, pressure building, while her mind ran calculations that had nothing to do with ballistics. Rules of engagement. Fire only when directly threatened or when ground commander explicitly requests support fire. Kane had requested suppression, but that meant area fire to keep heads down, not precision shooting to eliminate threats. Different authorization level. Chain of command. She answered to Lieutenant Grant, who answered to Major Cross, who answered to people with ranks that meant decisions. Taking independent action without explicit orders was technically insubordination. Operational doctrine. Support elements maintained their positions, preserved their concealment, stayed ready for the unexpected threat. The moment she fired, her position was compromised. If there were additional hostiles, and there almost certainly were, she would become a target. All of that processed in less than 2 seconds. Then she looked through her scope at the valley below, where Private Lucy Grant was bleeding in the snow, while Kane tried to drag her to cover. Ethics was a word for classrooms and briefings. The valley only cared about physics. Natalie found her target again. The hostile had shifted to new cover, but part of his head and shoulder remained visible. Not a perfect shot, not an easy one. 840 meters according to her rangefinder, with crosswind now hitting 35 kilometers per hour from the northwest, temperature still dropping, her own elevated heart rate affecting her stability. She ran the math. Wind compensation, 1.2 mils right. Elevation, already set for 800 meters, no adjustment needed. Temperature, the cold air was denser, so her round would fly slightly flatter, but at this range the difference was negligible. Target was moving occasionally, popping up to fire, then ducking back. She needed to time it, catch him in that exposed moment. She controlled her breathing. 4 counts in, hold, 6 counts out. Heart rate decreased. Scope steadied. She found her natural respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body was still. The hostile rose to fire. Natalie pressed the trigger. The Barrett kicked like a mule. The massive round left the barrel at 853 meters per second, crossing the valley in slightly more than 1 second. In that time, wind pushed it sideways, gravity pulled it down, air resistance slowed it, and the Earth's rotation introduced a microscopic deflection that she had already calculated. Through the scope, she watched the hostile's head snap back. He dropped and didn't move. No time to confirm the kill. She was already finding the next target, a hostile in the northwest who was flanking Kane's position. Range, 700 meters. Wind, same. Breathing, controlled. Second shot. The hostile jerked and fell. Overwatch 1 is engaging. She said it into the radio not as a request, but as a statement of fact. What she was already doing. What she would continue doing. Kane's voice came back, strained but grateful. Confirmed. Keep shooting. She did. Third target. A hostile using a rock outcrop for cover, exposing himself to shoot at Owen Harris. Range, 890 meters, the furthest shot of her career outside of a range. She compensated for the increased distance, added another half mil of elevation, waited for the moment. The hostile shifted. She fired. The round struck low, hitting the rock instead of flesh. The hostile flinched backward, momentarily suppressed but not eliminated. Natalie cursed silently, worked the bolt, chambered another round. The hostile was more cautious now, aware someone was shooting from the ridge. She waited. Patience was a weapon too. 15 seconds passed. The hostile risked a glance, trying to locate her position. She fired before he could duck back. This time the round found him. He collapsed behind the rock. The valley had changed. The hostiles' coordinated assault was fracturing. They had expected to have the high ground, to control the engagement, to dictate terms. Now someone was shooting them from above, from a position they hadn't accounted for, with precision that suggested professional training. They began to adjust, pulling back to harder cover, changing their tactics. But adjustment took time, and time was what Kane's squad needed. Ground is moving to Rally Point Beta, Kane reported. Overwatch. Keep them off us. Natalie traversed her rifle to the northwest, where Vickers was engaging multiple targets. She found a hostile trying to flank him, put the crosshairs on the threat, pressed the trigger. The hostile went down. Overwatch 2. You've got one less problem, she said. Appreciated. Vickers's rifle continued firing, slower now, more deliberate. He was rationing his ammunition. She scanned for new threats. Found one. A hostile with a radio, clearly coordinating the ambush. Positioned behind a fallen tree in the northeast. Leadership target. High value. Range. 730 meters. Wind, quartering from her right now, shifted slightly. She adjusted, held for the crosswind, waited for a clear shot. The hostile raised his head to speak into the radio. Natalie fired. The round hit him in the upper chest. He fell sideways, radio tumbling into snow. Without their coordinator, the hostile elements became less synchronized. They were still dangerous, still numerous, but they had lost cohesion. Individual fighters, instead of a unified force. Kane's squad reached better cover, a cluster of rocks that provided protection from multiple angles. They were establishing a defensive position, returning fire with more effectiveness now that they weren't moving. Overwatch. We're set. Can you see our 3 o'clock? Natalie swung to that sector. 2 hostiles were working their way around the rocks, trying to find an angle. She engaged the first, forced him down, then shifted to the second. Her round hit him in the leg. Not fatal, but it took him out of the fight. Time compressed. She fired, worked the bolt, found a new target, fired again. The Barrett's recoil pounded her shoulder. Brass casings ejected in golden arcs, landing in the snow beside her. The rifle heated despite the cold, metal expanding slightly, changing her 0. She compensated instinctively. Below, the squad was fighting. Harris threw a grenade that detonated among the trees, creating a gap in the hostile line. Kane exploited it, directing his people to move to better ground. They were working their way toward the forest edge, toward the route they had used during insertion. If they reached the trees, they had a chance, but the hostiles recognized the same thing. They intensified their fire, trying to pin the squad in place. Natalie kept shooting. Her magazine ran dry after the 9th shot. She dropped it, felt it tumble away, already reaching for a fresh one. 10 rounds. She had brought 4 magazines, 40 rounds total, thinking she would never fire even one. She was down to 31. Reload. Muscle memory. Magazine seated, bolt forward, round chambered. Back in the fight in under 4 seconds. The hostiles had finally located her position. Rounds started impacting the rocks around her, close enough that she heard the distinctive whip crack of supersonic bullets. She shifted left, found new cover, resumed firing from a different angle. Target. Hostile with a machine gun setting up on the southeast ridge. If he got that weapon operational, Kane's squad was finished. Range, 900 meters. Wind, variable, gusting. Difficult shot. She took it anyway. First round missed. The machine gunner didn't even flinch, focused on assembling his weapon. She adjusted, fired again. This time, the round hit him in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The machine gun fell, unfinished. Overwatch 1. Be advised, you're taking fire, Vickers said. I can see muzzle flashes from your position. Noted. She kept scanning for targets, kept shooting. The ridge had become its own battlefield now. The hostiles wanted her dead, wanted to eliminate the sniper who was destroying their ambush. They diverted resources toward her, which meant fewer shooters engaging Kane. That was good. That was the job. Another magazine empty. 21 rounds remaining. She had to be more selective, make every shot count. Below, the squad reached the forest edge. They were fighting toward the trees. Using leapfrog tactics, one element moved, while another provided covering fire. Professional. Efficient. They had a chance now, but the hostiles weren't finished. 3 more appeared from the northeast, fresh fighters who hadn't been visible before. They moved to cut off the forest approach, trying to force the squad back into the open. Natalie engaged them immediately. First target, range 760. Fired. Missed the target, dropped before her round arrived. She adjusted to the second target. Fired. Hit. The hostile fell. Third target was already in cover, aware of her presence. She waited for him to move. 10 seconds. 15. He rose to fire at the squad. She shot him. Ground. Your route is clear, she reported. Move now. Kane's squad sprinted the last 30 meters to the trees and disappeared into the forest. They were out of the kill zone, moving toward extraction, still alive because Natalie had bought them time with precision fire from a ridge she wasn't supposed to abandon. But she wasn't done yet. The remaining hostiles were pursuing, moving into the forest after the squad. Natalie could see glimpses of them through the trees, dark shapes against white, harder shots, more variables. She engaged anyway, firing at movement, at shadows, at anything that threatened her people. Vickers was engaging the northwest sector, keeping another group of hostiles pinned. Together, they had turned the ambush inside out. The hunters had become the hunted, forced to worry about what was behind them instead of what was ahead. Overwatch, ground. We're at the secondary extraction point. Weather is deteriorating. We need immediate evacuation. Lieutenant Grant answered. Ground, command. Helicopter is inbound. Ida, 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Natalie checked her ammunition. 13 rounds. The hostiles were still active, still trying to press the pursuit. 13 rounds to keep them suppressed for 15 minutes. She made them count. At 1,037 hours, Natalie's rifle fell silent. Not by choice, she had no ammunition left. 4 magazines, 40 rounds, all expended over 23 minutes of continuous engagement. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her fingers were numb despite her gloves. Ice had formed on her eyebrows, turning them white. The valley was quieter now. Sporadic gunfire echoed from the forest where Kane's squad was fighting toward extraction. The hostiles had pulled back slightly, regrouping, trying to understand what had gone wrong with their perfect ambush. Natalie broke down her position. She packed her rifle, collected her empty magazines, erased evidence of her presence. The military called it sanitizing. She called it covering her tracks before someone decided to investigate the ridge. Her radio crackled. Overwatch 1, Overwatch 2. I'm Winchester on ammunition, displacing to secondary position. Overwatch 1 copies. I'm also Winchester, beginning displacement. She moved carefully, staying low, using terrain for concealment. The hostiles might send someone to clear the ridge. She needed to be gone before they arrived. Cold had deepened during the engagement. Her weather meter showed -18 now, wind gusting to 40 kilometers per hour. The storm was closing in, turning the air opaque with snow. Visibility dropped to less than 200 meters. She navigated by memory and compass, following the ridge eastward toward the extraction zone. The rock was slick with ice. Wind tried to push her off the ridge. Every step required concentration, balance, physical strength she wasn't sure she still had. At 1,044, she reached the rally point where Vickers waited. He looked as exhausted as she felt. Hell of a time to run dry, he said. Hell of a time for a lot of things. They moved together, 2 support assets who had stopped being support, descending the ridge toward the extraction zone where helicopter rotors were beating against wind. The radio crackled with traffic. Kane's squad had reached the landing zone. The helicopter was touching down. Everyone was loading. Everyone except the 2 snipers still descending the ridge. Overwatch elements. What's your status? Lieutenant Grant's voice carried urgency. Overwatch 1 and 2 are 3 minutes from LZ, Natalie replied. Copy. Helicopter is holding for you. Weather window is closing. You need to move faster. They did. Running now, abandoning caution for speed, sliding down icy rock, risking broken bones for the chance to leave. The extraction zone appeared through snow, a flat area where the helicopter waited, rotors screaming, snow swirling in the downdraft. Kane's squad was aboard, faces visible through the open door. Owen Harris was holding pressure on Lucy Grant's wound. Others were checking each other for injuries, dealing with the aftermath of combat. Natalie and Vickers sprinted the last 100 meters. Hands reached out, pulled them aboard. The helicopter lifted before they had even found seats, tilting forward, accelerating away from the valley. Through the door, Natalie caught a last glimpse of the ridge. Just rock and snow and wind. No evidence of what had happened there. No indication that a single soldier with a rifle had changed the outcome of an entire operation. The valley disappeared into white. The debriefing happened 6 hours later, after medical checks, after hot showers, after the adrenaline had drained away, leaving only exhaustion. Major Cross sat at the head of the table with a laptop displaying drone footage from the valley. Lieutenant Grant stood beside her. Kane and his squad occupied the front row. Natalie sat in the back with Vickers, where support assets belonged. Let's walk through it, Cross said. Ground element encountered prepared ambush at 1,004 hours. 13 confirmed hostiles, possibly more. Air support was unavailable due to weather. Ground element was surrounded and taking casualties. She played the drone footage, black and white thermal imagery showing the ambush unfold. The squad trapped, the hostiles closing in. Then, one by one, hostile signatures disappearing. Not from the squad's weapons those kills were visible. Close range, chaotic. These were different. Long range, precise. One shot, one target eliminated. Command analysts counted 11 hostile casualties from long-range fire, Cross continued. 7 confirmed kills, 4 wounded, seriously enough to withdraw from combat. This suppression fire allowed the ground element to break contact and reach extraction. She paused the footage on a thermal image of the ridge. 2 bright signatures, barely visible through the storm, positioned 800 meters from the valley floor. Overwatch elements Cord and Vickers engaged without authorization, expending their entire ammunition load in support of the ground element. Cross looked directly at Natalie. Private Cord, you fired first. Walk me through your decision process. The room was silent. Every eye turned toward the back row. Natalie stood. Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Kane requested suppression fire. I assessed that precision fire from my position would be more effective than area suppression. I engaged targets that posed immediate threat to the ground element. You assessed, Cross repeated. You were assigned to observe and report, not to engage in independent targeting. Yes, ma'am. You compromised your position, expended your ammunition, and deviated from the operational plan. Yes, ma'am. Cross let that hang in the air. Then she looked at Kane. Staff Sergeant, would your squad have reached extraction without that suppression fire? Kane didn't hesitate. No, ma'am. We'd still be in that valley. Probably dead. Lieutenant Grant, your assessment? Paul Grant stood. Ma'am, Private Cord's actions were tactically sound and operationally necessary. She saved the squad. Cross nodded slowly. Private Cord, you understand that what you did violates protocol. You took independent action without authorization. You engaged targets outside your assigned sector. You exposed your position unnecessarily. I understand, ma'am. You also demonstrated exceptional marksmanship under extreme conditions. 11 targets engaged at ranges between 700 and 900 meters, in high wind, degraded visibility, and sub-zero temperatures. Your hit rate was approximately 80%, which exceeds even our most optimistic training standards. Natalie said nothing. There was no response that fit this moment. Cross closed her laptop. The official report will state that both Overwatch elements provided critical fire support that enabled successful extraction of the ground element. Private Cord, effective immediately, you are reassigned from support Overwatch to primary sniper operations. Corporal Vickers, same. You've earned it. The room remained silent. Then Harris started clapping. Others joined. Kane stood, walked to the back row, and offered his hand. Thank you, he said simply. Lucy Grant, arm in a sling, smiled. Guest support isn't so boring after all. But Natalie knew better. It wasn't about excitement. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what needed doing when nobody else could. That was the job. It always had been. 3 weeks later, Natalie returned to the ridge. Not for a mission. There were no missions scheduled in that valley anymore. Not after what had happened. She went because she needed to see it again. Needed to stand in the place where everything had changed. The weather was calmer now. Wind still blew, but without the violent intensity of that day. Snow lay in clean sheets across the rock, undisturbed except by her own footprints. She found her old position easily, recognized the specific arrangement of rocks she had used for cover. Spent casings still littered the ground, frozen into ice, 40 brass reminders of 40 decisions. She collected them, one by one, dropping them into a bag she had brought for exactly this purpose. Below, the valley stretched empty. The listening post had been demolished as planned. The forest showed no signs of combat. Nature had reclaimed everything, covering the violence with fresh snow and time. Paul Grant had hiked up with her, standing a respectful distance away while she worked through whatever she needed to work through. Major Cross wants you for advanced training, he said eventually. Long-range reconnaissance, extended operations, the kind of missions that don't have support assets, because every asset is essential. I'll think about it. You should do more than think. You're good at this. Really good. She finished collecting the casings, stood, looked at the valley one more time. I did what I was trained to do. Made the shots. Followed the numbers. You did more than that. Grant moved to stand beside her. You saw what needed to happen and made it happen. That's not training. That's judgment. Maybe. Or maybe it was just being in the right place at the wrong time, with the right skills and the wrong orders. Sometimes those variables aligned. Sometimes they produced outcomes that looked like heroism but were really just mathematics applied under pressure. They descended the ridge together, leaving the valley to its silence. Natalie's promotion to specialist came through on a Tuesday. With it came new assignment orders. Designated marksman instructor at the advanced training facility, teaching the next generation of shooters how to read wind, calculate distance, make impossible shots possible. She accepted both. The squad sent her off with the traditional ritual. Terrible speeches, worse food, sincere gratitude expressed through jokes and insults. Harris gave her a scope he had somehow acquired from supply, already mounted and zeroed. Lucy Grant, recovered from her wound, presented her with a framed photograph of the valley, taken from a helicopter during extraction. You could see the ridge in the background, barely visible through snow. "So you remember where it started," Lucy said. But Natalie knew it hadn't started on the ridge. It had started in every training session where she had perfected her breathing, every hour spent studying ballistics, every cold morning on the range when she could have stayed warm but chose to shoot instead. The ridge was just where all those preparations converged into a single moment of decision. Kane pulled her aside before she left. "I wrote something in your file," he said. "Recommendation for decoration. You should probably know that before you read it in some official context." "That's not necessary." "Yeah, it is. Because next time someone thinks support assets don't matter, I want them to read about what happened in that valley. I want them to understand that the person on the ridge saved more lives than the people on the ground." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. Major Cross found her during the final hour, just as Natalie was loading her gear. "I need to tell you something," Cross said. "About protocol and orders and doing what's right. Ma'am, I understand I deviated from—" "Let me finish." Cross's expression was serious, but not angry. "What you did was technically wrong. Chain of command matters. Orders matter. Discipline matters. But knowing when to break all of that for something more important that matters too." She handed Natalie a folder. "Inside, you'll find my assessment of the operation. You'll notice I wrote that the Overwatch elements adapted to changing tactical conditions and provided fire support within the scope of their training and authority. That's the official version. And the unofficial version? The unofficial version is that you trusted your judgment over your orders, and you were right. That's a dangerous precedent. It's also sometimes necessary. The trick is knowing which situation you're in." Cross paused. "I think you'll figure it out." Natalie transferred to the training facility the next week. She taught ballistics, wind reading, range estimation. She taught the mathematics of violence and the discipline required to employ it precisely. But more than that, she taught judgment how to recognize the moment when doctrine ended and necessity began. The ridge remained in her memory, not as a triumph or a turning point, but as a reminder. Winter had taught her something that day. When lives depended on it, support became primary, orders became suggestions, and a single person in the right place could change everything. She carried that lesson into every class, every training evolution, every conversation with students who wondered if their role mattered. It did. It always had. Years later, when people asked about the valley, and they did ask, because stories like that circulated, she kept her answers simple. She was in position. She had clear shots. She took them. Nothing complicated, nothing heroic. Just a soldier on a ridge, doing math in the cold, making decisions that saved lives. The winter didn't care about protocol. Neither did the bullet. In the end, that was the only truth that mattered.